Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Welcome to Ignition Sequence. I'm John Murphy. Today we're exploring transhumanism, a rapidly accelerating movement that aims to use advanced technologies to enhance human longevity, cognition, and well-being. Our guest, Zoltan Istvan, is a journalist, futurist, and former U.S. presidential candidate who has devoted his career to exploring the transformative potential of science and technology. From his work as a National Geographic reporter in conflict zones to his advocacy for transhumanism, Zoltan challenges us to rethink what it means to be human. Zoltan, welcome to the Ignition Sequence podcast. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, what did you think about this year's presidential election since you ran for president once before?
Well, I think, to be honest with you, mainstream media continues to have its bias, and therefore they got the polls wrong early on. And Trump won by a large amount, which was completely contra, I think, what the major media was forecasting. And so, as a kind of a longtime journalist, I got to say I'm a little bit sad that the media just really won't be reporting the honest truth with bias. And, whether Trump or Kamala won, it's really the American people have spoken. They've spoken pretty forthright. So I think we should follow it. If we love democracy and we want to stand up, let's push democracy. And that's what's happened.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of interesting because you have, obviously Kamala was much younger, but Biden was in his 80s. Trump's going to be in his 80s, by the time his term is up. And, we're talking about transhumanism and everything. And the stamina that it takes to be the president of the United States or any country for that matter, you got to have it, especially if you're older like that. And the future of science and technology enhancing our lives and extending our lives is here, and it's right now, and that's what we're here to talk about on transhumanism.
Yeah, no, I agree. And people. The funny thing, though, is clearly, if you're just watching TV, you can see Biden is showing his age. Though, if you watch a little bit of Joe Rogan, just the 3.5 hours that Trump is on it, wow, that man has stamina. So, it's kind of a good metaphor for kind of transhumanism in a way, because the truth of the matter is it's not really based on biological age. It's actually based on a lot of your genetics and who you are as a person. There are some 100-year-olds that are very, very sharp, and there are some 60-year-olds that are not sharp at all.
Right.
And, it has a lot to do with, and that's kind of where transhumanism can come in. How can we make every person that's in their 50s and 60s as sharp as a 30 or 40-year-old, and every person, even that's in their 80s and 90s, as sharp as a 30 or 40-year-old? And hopefully we're just a few years away from that now.
I read some research that they had reported that the prime years for being creative and active and to actually live your best full life is between the ages of 60 and 70. And the second prime years are between 70 and 80. And the third prime years are between 50 and 60. So thank God it's okay for old guys because, we have a shot to be still contributing to the world.
Well, I think as you get into kind of, older age, maybe you don't have to work as much. Maybe you just can take it easy. Maybe you can just, your kids are growing up in many cases. And I got to be honest, I got 2 young kids. Let's be honest. That's when they're like 12 months old, 1 year, 2 year, and they're trying to stick their tongue into outlets. Nothing is more stressful. You are constantly worrying about their survivability. And so if you talk about, now one of them's 14. She went off. She's at some boy's house, with another friend. And I'm like, that's great. It's just like, I don't even think about it anymore because they're old enough. And then I have a 10-year-old here in the house and she's reading. It's just a lot easier than when they're 1 or 2. And when your kids are 1 or 2, you're usually in your 30s or your 40s. So I think that speaks a lot to it. And maybe that's just the father in me biased right now. The other thing is, hopefully by your 50s, 60s, and 70s, you've achieved a certain amount of wealth that allows you to do more of what you want to do. When you're in your 30s, you're still camping out a lot, sleep in the back of cars when you're on surf trips like I did. But, I'm going to Morocco in 7 days' time. I'm not staying in my car anymore, thankfully, because I'm 50 plus. So, these things change, and maybe a lot of it is just socioeconomic factors.
Yeah. But also with transhumanism, and we'll get to the dive into exactly what it is. Where do you see things going? So it's kind of the concept of science and technology to enhance and extend life. Where do you see humanity in the next 100 years, and then maybe extend it out to 500 years?
Yeah, absolutely. And well, so transhumanism, just so your listeners know, is kind of in Latin, just going beyond human. But really, it's a social movement now of many millions of people that want to use science and technology to radically upgrade the human being, and that can be anything from exoskeleton suits to brain implants, like Elon Musk is doing, to even just uh, crazy different types of vaccines that you might be taking that might not be like for mass market. Whatever transhumanism is, typically the top 10%. Now, I'm not advocating for all forms of transhumanism, though generally I support it. But there are some things, like people that want to become fish. I personally don't want to become a fish. But that's transhumanism, just so everyone understands it. It's this radical idea that the human being is not what you think it is. It's whatever you want it to be. And you can modify it. And people like me who don't want to die would like to either achieve that by merging ourselves with artificial intelligence at some point in the future, or becoming some kind of cyborg that's super strong like Superman and superhuman, and can traverse time and space and all these other things in some spaceship. I mean, that's the final frontier, sort of where transhumanism goes. In the meantime, though, it's just like, what can we do to live a lot longer? Well, there are a ton of drugs that are hitting the market. There are, and we can get the lifespan to 120. If you can survive the next 20 years, there's a very good chance that you're going to be able to make it to maybe 150 to 500. And when you get to age 500, who knows what the world's like? I mean, it's changing so quickly. I would suspect, just so you know, if you make it to, into the next century, it's probably all AI. Probably our brains and everything are embedded into a virtual world and things like that. I'd be very surprised we're even flesh, because biology dies. Biology is terminal. But ones and zeros and things that operate on titanium and graphene and things like that, and computer chips, they could last indefinitely.
Now, I know you don't necessarily subscribe to the Judeo-Christian belief system, but in the Bible, there's a lot of old people in the Bible. Adam was 930 years old. Noah, 950 years old. Methuselah, 969 years old. So, if you subscribe to that belief system, then yeah, God has already provided that the human body can sustain a long, long time. If we add science and technology to it, who knows what could really happen?
Well, look, and while I'm a secular person, I completely can understand and maybe even empathize with the fact that Christians believe that people lived hundreds of years, thousands of years, apparently, or close to it, through the Bible. And that technology would have been through God, through a Judeo-Christian entity that's
Mhm.
almighty, apparently. And I'm totally on board with saying that is transhumanism. It doesn't really matter. Transhumanism is just a word. What it is we're trying to find some type of means, some type of technology. And technology is always magical. When you first come up with the drugs, or anesthesia and all these other things, they were complete magic to the people that happened to 100 years ago. Same thing with combustion engines and things like that. And then all of a sudden we take a lot of that stuff for granted because we understand it more. But believe me, there are technologies out there that we're going to come to understand here in 20, 30, 50 years time that today would seem like absolutely insanity, and probably put that person in a mental house. But that's the nature of technologies. You never really understand. It always seems magical first. So I'm completely on board with, especially because Judeo-Christianity is 2 billion people plus, and if that's how they think the technology arrived for those people who live that long in the Bible, I'm happy to say that. And I've said this before. A lot of my thesis at University of Oxford was on quantum archaeology, this idea that you can resurrect human beings through technological resurrection. It could easily be the work of God, or it could easily be another way to even bring back Christ at some point through methods that he may have determined, way before I was born, if I was to believe that. But I'm totally on board, and I hope most transhumanists are saying that, just because we don't understand religion doesn't mean it's not true. Science, in many ways, isn't true until we find it to be real, and we invent it. So we can wait and see who's right and wrong. But I'm certainly open to either way.
Can you get a little specific for us and share with us any technologies that you know are absolutely on the cutting edge of extending life expectancy? So what is the average life expectancy in the United States right now? Is it like 78, 80 years old for women and 76 for men, something like that?
Yeah, something like I think it might have reached the 80s for the women. COVID changed some things, but they're kind of coming bouncing back. And of course, there's Ozempic, then the obesity drug, which could literally bump that number up a couple of years if a large amount of obese people start taking the drug, kind of a wonder drug. Talk about magic. But the point though is that people live somewhere around their 80s, a little bit less. There are things out there that are going to change. So most people die from organ failure, and we're now working
Mhm.
on a huge amount of artificial organs, and it's not just artificial hearts and things like that. It's artificial pancreas, artificial kidney, stem cell technologies, that they can put into to damaged areas of your cellular tissue. But essentially, if we can keep your organs alive longer and maintain them better, we can keep it. So there's a lot more organ transplant trying to happen, especially on the synthetic level where people have synthetic organs put in. And you're going to see a rise in people living longer just because of that. Now, the problem, though, is that that's only going to be afforded to really probably the wealthy people at first. And so it's going to take a long time for a lot of the kind of, developing countries, third world, poor people to get hold of a lot of that technology. You may not see it in the statistics, but you certainly see it in the statistics of wealthy Americans already and wealthy Europeans who are having access to this technology. It's a known fact, whether it's morally right or wrong, that wealthy people live dramatically longer than poor people. And a lot of that has not just to do with eating better foods, but also just because of end of life, they have access to the better cancer treatments, better Alzheimer treatments, better organ transplant treatments, and things like that.
What about the fact that at least here in the United States, post World War II, obesity rates, heart disease rates, anxiety, depression has just the curve is exponential because of our processing nature, processed foods, things like that. It seems like there's an exterior component, but there's an interior component that we have to do emotionally and with our bodies in a health way.
Yeah, no, I mean, let's be honest. Most Americans, I was just reading a statistic today that said three-quarters of Americans, adult Americans, are obese. I don't know if that's actually right because I thought it was more like two-thirds, but or 40% even. But it's growing, and I mean, there's the greatest cause for death is literally obesity. I mean, if you are overweight and not
Mhm.
exercising a lot, you have an incredibly higher chance of dying prematurely than anything essentially else. Um, and so, you would then think, well, the number two, one and two things you should do is eat less and exercise more. But this is very difficult in a world where you can walk into Walmart and pay $2 and get, a big giant bag of potato chips that has enough calories for 4 or 5 days. And of course, $2 takes the average
Mhm.
person just about 8 or 9 minutes of work, whatever. Even if you're just working at McDonald's, to afford that. That is not how our bodies were designed. Biologically, our bodies were designed to grow stuff and to chase after stuff and hunt stuff. And and our bodies
Mhm.
haven't evolved very much since in the last 1,000 years. Of course, barely any. So we're in this great problem where capitalism has run amok, and I'm a big fan of capitalism. Don't get me wrong. Okay, I really support it. But when it comes to people's diets and people's health, it's not helping. Who knows? Maybe RFK Jr. and so who's going to be the potential Secretary of Human Health may improve things because he's very much against this. But I think any logical person should just know: don't buy potato chips anymore. Avoid things with corn syrup. Just try to stick with the organics.
Right.
It's a little bit more expensive, and if you eat mostly green things. Try to avoid anything else. Eat natural foods and eat less. And of course, every single day, I just went for my run. Every single day, work out. I don't care what it is, if it's just a walk, if it's just sitting at your desk, standing up all day, taking your phone calls for sales, whatever it is. But you can't go and eat donuts and expect to live, you know, beyond 80. You're not, it's not going to happen. So there's an epidemic of just not taking care of ourselves. And capitalism has run amok with giant corporations that are making billions and billions of dollars off harming and cutting off years of your health.
You mentioned Ozempic and you talked about, this beautiful technology of pharmaceuticals and helping people and extending their lives, enhancing their lives. And people are now saying Ozempic, wow, it's a miracle drug. But is that dangerous? Is that dangerous to the point that you just mentioned that people want a quick fix for everything and they don't want to work hard, or they don't want to do the hard things to be discerning, eat right, do those things that science and technology can really do a lot of things to enhance us. But what about the human condition where we just want the easy road all the time?
Yeah, no, I mean, I am suffering from this exact dilemma. I'll be honest here. I'm 20 pounds overweight. I may not look it right now, but I have been for 10 years. I drink scotch at night because I enjoy it. And I wish I could be more fit to the point when I was a water polo player and swimmer in my youth. Okay, I'm not obese
Mm,
or anything like that, but certainly I'm detracting from my years. And so my wife is a medical doctor, and I've discussed going on Ozempic just because it might be. And she's like, well, why don't you stop drinking, maybe eating so much? And I said, well, that's easier said than done. I've not had success at that over a 10-year period of time. Just being myself and knowing that I'm about 20 pounds overweight. Therefore, is it my fault, or is it I'm just too lazy? To be honest with you, I'm going to be honest. I'm too lazy. I don't have the willpower. However, I'd say 80-90% of the Americans are in that kind of same boat. And if there is a magic pill out there that can revolutionize us and make us live longer or better, then I would take it. Is it making my will suffer? Is it make my integrity suffer? Yeah, there's no question. I'm failing at this, and I would consider this a poor spot in my spirit, my overall sense of who I am. I admit it, and I think America is having that same thing. It'd be so much easier to just not have a midnight snack and drink a little bit less scotch, and I would be ready to go and be at my ideal weight. But we're biological human beings. It's tough to be perfect at all moments. And so if there's a little,
mhm, mhm.
fixture like Ozempic, maybe it's for the best. But it doesn't, like, to answer your question, make us spiritually or psychologically stronger. Certainly, it's going to continue to make us weaker.
How did you get involved or inspired by transhumanism and the idea of that? Tell us about your that moment, that flash aha moment. This is my calling. This is what I'm going to, pursue for my professional career and my life. What was that? How to get started for you?
Sure. Well, I was a journalist at National Geographic out of college. That was a wonderful job. I got to travel around to about 70 different countries, reported on stories for the National Geographic channel as well as the National Geographic website, and did a lot of solo journalism where I would just go in and do a story by myself. What a wonderful time in my life in my late 20s. However, I did, to make a name in journalism at that point in time, you really need to cover conflict zones to be able to emerge quickly and make a name in journalism. So I did a lot of war zones,
Mhm.
and one of the stories I was covering was in Vietnam. And while it wasn't a conflict zone, it was filled with landmines. The story I was doing was covering landmines. And what happens in Vietnam is the DMZ is filled with mines and bombs. And there are people, tens of thousands of Vietnamese, that are uncovering these bombs with metal detectors. They take these bombs out of the ground, they dismantle them, and they sell the metal. So a farmer who's normally making $1 a day can make $1,000 a day if he gets lucky and finds the right bomb. Now, what happens is when America dropped bombs, 10-15% of the bombs never exploded. So the entire demilitarized zone of Vietnam is filled with unexploded ordinances that is worth a fortune in terms of metal. I was covering this story and had a very close call with a landmine where my kind of guide threw me out of the way and said, look, there was one half exposed. I almost stepped on it. Really stupid move of mine. It got me thinking philosophically, wow, I'm afraid of death. I don't want to die. What am I doing out here in these conflict
Mhm.
zones? I'd seen some bit of gunfire in Kashmir, I'd heard, and stuff like that, covering other things. So it's like I went back to America and rethought my life and thought, wow, I would like to dedicate my life to not dying, to overcoming death. And lo and behold, there was already a movement called transhumanism that had ample resources, ample scientists working on figuring out how to overcome death. Now, 20, 30 years ago, overcoming death was still a kind of science fiction concept. Today, it's very real. There are billionaires from Zuckerberg to Bezos. Everybody is pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into overcoming physiological death. But 20, 30 years ago, it was still a dream. So I started pushing this movement forward, and I ran for president on the Transhumanist Party political ticket. Movements like environmentalism. Think of environmentalism 30 years ago. Nobody was talking about protecting the planet
Right.
30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Today, everybody. It's like, it's completely natural. But there were people in the 60s, 70s, Greenpeace, chasing down protecting whales and things like that, that started a movement. So we're trying to start transhumanism. While it has already started to catch on, the idea of overcoming death still is not a worldwide phenomenon. But if we put enough resources, we'll realize that the human being is a machine, just like any other machine, and we will be able to tinker with it enough to overcome death some point here in the future. And, once that hit me after the National Geographic incident with the landmine, I kind of put all my energy and resources towards transhumanism, towards dedicating it and become sort of one of its public figures. And, and we're coming a lot closer. I got to say, the age of overcoming death is probably within a decade or 2 decades away, in my opinion, given how fast technology is progressing now.
And when you say overcoming death, I mean, literally, somebody could live forever, the fountain of youth, through science and technology.
Yes, and I don't mean an airplane crash. I mean, if someone dies in an airplane crash, it's really gone,
Yeah.
because it's. But I'm talking about finding ways to have vaccines, for example, for cancer, avoiding cancer, curing cancer, brain stem cell transplantation with Alzheimer's, so that you always have good brain cells, so maybe you don't get Alzheimer's. Ways to engage ourselves so that we can live 130 and still be ourselves. But that's just the first part. The real important part is actually reversing aging, getting to a point when you and I can be 10 years younger than where we are now, maybe even 20, and staying at the prime of our lives. And they've had some success with mice. They've had some success with other rodents. We're coming down that road. And I think the big picture here right now is, with artificial intelligence starting to process, different types of molecules that will make us live longer and better in ways that human researchers could never do, because our minds are just so limited. We're going to have a much faster trajectory of discovering drugs that allow us to do that. I don't know if it's going to be genetic modification, if it's going to be stem cells, if it's going to be completely synthetic organs, but we will become at some point cyborgs to live better and longer. We have a lot of technology outside of us, from driverless cars to, doing the Zoom thing, but eventually all this will be embedded. It's just a matter of time, and it's going to become embedded as it becomes smarter, more useful to do. And there are hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars. I live in San Francisco, pouring into Silicon Valley to try to work on these things right now. Even like Elon Musk Neuralink, the idea that you can play chess and talk to each other, have this podcast probably in 3 years through your brain without talking, without using your senses. I mean, this stuff is here now. It's being tested already. So we're entering a very brave new age. And I would be very surprised if within 25 years, we don't have a lot of new drugs that allow us to start reversing our aging and probably cure most diseases out there.
Yeah. I had the great opportunity. I worked on another television show. I'm a wildlife producer on Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. But prior to that, I worked on a show called Innovation Nation. And I was doing a story at the University of Texas Galveston branch, where they actually used stem cells from a pig that had some lung issues. And they grew a brand new lung for this pig in a lab, in a controlled laboratory environment. They surgically replaced the lung, and because it was made out of its own stem cells, there was no rejection. The lung totally adapted to its new, body, and the pig went on to live a healthy life. And the wow factor of that, of doing that with somebody's kidney failures or heart or their own lungs for humans, is really fantastic. That you could generate your own organs and not have any rejection or take rejection drugs or any of that kind of stuff, simply by utilizing your own stem cells and taking a what they call it, the platform of a kidney or whatever organ you're trying to build, stripping it out of all the blood and the everything else that's in there and the platelets, and then just starting to build your own new organ that you need in a lab. It's really fantastic, and I saw it with my own eyes.
So, no, I mean, you wouldn't believe some of the science that's out there right now. And I don't want to, be the downer here, but one of the important things I think about Trump being nominated is that the FDA is going to be sliced down to something more efficient. Because you wouldn't believe some of the life extension drugs that are out there right now that could be used on us, but aren't, because the FDA takes 10, sometimes 12 years for
Yeah.
medical devices to even get through the system. There are some experimental channels that can go quicker. And this is one of the problems too with China, is China is, in the same boat. They realize, wow, we're changing the world with science, genetic editing, CRISPR, all this other stuff. But their timeline to get drugs through the pipeline is something like 3 to 5.5 years, where ours is closer to 7 to 11 years. Well, you can only last so long before, because of the patent system, when a country like China starts providing life extension drugs, and we're still testing it out on people just to make sure it's safe. Now, don't get me wrong, I want to be able to go to the doctor's office, be prescribed something, and have it be safe. But I also realize that, uh, people like you and I don't know how long you have left to live. You look like probably have 25 to 30 years. But I would be very sad if we just missed a drug that could make us live indefinitely, because all of a sudden the government bureaucracy wanted to be just extra careful. So we have this new chance, I think, to really streamline drugs over the next 4 years, to hopefully get to a point when maybe we can accept that there's a little bit more risk. Because I understood before, in a Judeo-Christian nation, a lot of people didn't mind dying because they were going to go to heaven. But I would say a huge amount of people now are not really sure about the afterlife anymore. Therefore, they really are serious about living longer. And for me, to get drugs in the pipeline, to have all these different types of technologies that are going in Silicon Valley, and actually get them into my body, into my family's body, my kids' body, that's really important to me. So I'm strongly would encourage FDA and Health United States and around the world to stop regulation so much, and to just say, you know what, it's more important to try to live longer, more quickly, especially as we're all on the cusp of this incredible age where maybe the world doesn't have to die anymore in 25 years.
On the other side of that, though, what about the impact of having billions of people living hundreds of years and the impact on the planet with just people being around? Uh, I know there is a population decline starting to happen here in the United States. We're not producing as many babies as we used to. Countries like Japan are in a severe baby drought. They're actually shrinking as a country. So the fact of longevity could be a plus for them, because uh, people can live longer, be productive longer, keep the country going longer. So there are some pluses, but I guess on the other side of it, population overpopulation, is that a potential?
Yeah, no, John, let me just tell you that, first off, humans have been destroying the planet over the last 100, 200 years, no question about it. And we are, you know, it's, I would say a huge part of that is overpopulation. All the countries I've traveled to, a lot of the National Geographic work I did in my 20s and 30s was environmental. It was just amazing. Yeah, when I covered Paraguay's rainforest, 92% of Paraguay's rainforest had been cut down. I mean, that's an
Wow.
insane number. That's not like,
Wow.
we cut down 30%, 92%. That was back then. The point is, we are destroying the planet. We are doing things. However, the transhumanist argument, and my argument as well, is that I understand that we are harming the planet, but we're also talking about our fathers. Like, for example, my father died about 6 years ago. He didn't make this cut when humanity might actually get to a point when drugs could make him live dramatically longer and maybe indefinitely. And believe me, I'd like to have my father back. And my mom's very old too. And then I have kids. And, we had a child across the street who died from leukemia in the beautiful San Francisco area I live in. I mean, death is real and it's incredibly sad. So while harming the environment is something that I wish we wouldn't do, and I wish we can avoid through whatever methods we could do so, overcoming death is a far more humanitarian task for me, the priority of my life. And I think we can work out how to deal with overpopulation. A lot of studies say that the world could have twice as many people as we have, as long as we were able to distribute resources better. This gets into other things like universal basic income, or whether billionaires maybe should be more supportive of other populations and things like that. Those are whole different philosophical and sociological kind of issues. But I do believe the world could handle twice the population. We just need to distribute resources more equitably and better. But for me, the priority remains that saving a life is the highest good that I can do on planet Earth, not worrying about Earth itself, even though I do love Earth and would love to protect it as well.
And there is something to be said of the wisdom that somebody 200 years old could impart on their family, on a community. Imagine if Abraham Lincoln was still alive today for some reason. Imagine the wisdom that he could impart on our racial relations in this country today, based on what he experienced during the Civil War 160 years ago.
Yes, and I think also just a fact of honesty. We have to trust the history books. We have to trust what the historians provided us. But I'd like to hear what I'd like to hear what Jesus said. To be honest with you, people have often talked about, like, we use technological resurrection. Who's the first person you'd bring back? A lot of people say Jesus. I would like to hear the truth, and I would like to also hear what Abraham Lincoln said. And plenty of, I just, like I said, my thesis at University of Oxford was on this idea of technological resurrection. One of the great things is people want to bring back Hitler to be judged in a real court of law, not just let go through because he killed himself. And these are new ideas that technology can bring us. I'm not sure it'll happen, exactly like that, but there are ways to find authenticity through radical technologies like this. But I am completely for this idea that we might actually one day have people not only live longer, but also the idea that there's some type of recovering the history or the past entirely because of better technologies to do so. I just want to know the truth. And as you know from the election, nobody really knew the truth. It was a wild time. It's still a wild time. I feel like America and the rest of the world has kind of gone a little bit dark. And it'd be nice to kind of have more perspective to believe what people say.
What do they say biologically about the use of our human brains? We only utilize about 10, 20% of it. If we're plugged into, an AI, uh, platform with a brain implant or something like that, imagine just the computing power of the human brain itself, of what it could do and what could be thought of, created, whether it's new government structures, new engineering, flying saucers, whatever. If for a human being, and not only just one, but millions or billions of human beings working at the highest capacity of brain computing power, wow, maybe we would create some kind of utopian system because we were able to really figure it out.
Well, I hope so. And let's just, talk a little bit about AI, really the 800-pound gorilla in the room these days. Some of
Yeah.
my channels in Silicon Valley, and I'm kind of, as a journalist, known a lot of the CEOs and whatnot. They say they're experimenting with AGI now, which would be artificial general intelligence, and intelligence that's as smart as you and I, that is able to create a conversation very similar to what you and I are having right now without knowing the difference that it's an AI. And now they're experimenting on that. Can't confirm whether that's right or wrong, but from ChatGPT, the AI has done a J curve in terms of intelligence. And it's wild to think that in a year or two, they'll be as smart as us, and potentially in 5 to 10 years, maybe hundreds of times smarter than us, if we allow that. And if, those are different ethical questions. But the point is, it's likely to happen. And it's likely to happen, just so your listeners know, because if America doesn't do it, China's going to do it, or Russia's going to do it. So democracy better do it first, get to these really sophisticated AIs. But how does that change our world? And if we're able to connect directly to these AIs, which I would love to do, I would love to be 1,000 times smarter. And, human beings have 5 senses. That's our the way we interpret the world, our eyesight, touch, hear, taste, whatever. But AI might have 1,000 senses. It might have many, many different forms of interpreting the world. And if that's the case, and we could plug into it, we would have different interpretations of the world. So, for example, the human eye can only see about 1% of the universe, but robotic technology can see about 60%. And then we know the rest is dark matter or whatever. But 60%, seeing 60% versus 1%, that's a total different perspective. So if we could already see, and the same thing happens with hearing, we have a terrible hearing compared to many animals, and terrible hearing compared to many robots. So we would become much more complex, and I think interesting individuals because of this ability to use enhanced technology to improve our interpretation of the universe and of reality. I absolutely want to do that. But does that bring in all sorts of weird things like superhumans and maybe other people who don't have access to technology? Yes, it does. But still, I mean, this is a brand new frontier to expand the human mind and expand human beings into something transhuman. It's going to be a wonderful age of discovery.
You're a surfer. You surf in the ocean. You have that visceral experience. Would you want to be a 200-year-old surfer and then elevate your physical body into the virtual world and surf? Would that be even enjoyable for you?
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I think what's really important to know here is just so your listeners know, the AI age, which we're entering upon now, might only last 10, 15, 20 years before something like the singularity, this idea when technology becomes so sophisticated that biological brains can't even comprehend its sophistication. Beyond the AI age, maybe something like the quantum age or just, quantum intelligence that roams the cosmos that we're somehow a part of. You have to understand when you look at how fast technology improves, it goes exponentially. And eventually, the improvement of technology will, what takes place in 5 seconds in 100 years will be more change than what took place in a billion years. And this is radical thinking, but this is the nature of exponential technology. So I think it's really important to understand that even the question of being a 200-year-old surfer, I like it, but it's probably not the way it's going to be. What's probably going to happen is in 10 or 15 years, I might start putting my consciousness to artificial intelligence. It will take a blueprint of who I am exactly, and they will spawn thousands of me, whether that's good or not, and send thousands of me into the virtual world. Probably within 5-10 years, there'll be more evolution of AI. I'll become quantum intelligence, maybe merged with people like yourself or my wife or my family or millions of. The point I'm trying to say is that we like to, anthropomorphize ourselves, that we will become human beings and I'll be a 200-year-old surfer in my 30-year-old body. But the reality is we're probably going to be living not only in virtual worlds, but in kind of these worlds that we can't even describe yet because they're so sophisticated. For example, the density of a black hole can be so intense. And we might be living within something like that where instead of expansion, things keep getting smaller, including our cells, our virtual selves. I guess they're not virtual anymore if you're dealing with subatomic particles. The point I'm trying to say is, before I get too far out there, is that it's really hard to imagine even 100-year future. Certainly the biology of our brains and ourselves will be gone, but even ones and zeros is when you start talking about quantum computing, which is something like 60 times faster than ones and zeros. I mean, and that's just today. What's the 10 quantum computing transformations that happen in the next 100 years? So it's incredibly difficult, but we're going to be something way beyond ourselves if we choose to be adventurers and go down that path.
Science and technology is amazing, but what about our human emotions, the things that are the soul, the things that make us cry and make us laugh? Will that be discontinued? Will that evaporate? Will that just go away?
Well, I hope not. And I've said this before that, the goal of living indefinitely is not the goal of living indefinitely as somebody else. If I lose too much of myself, I'm not interested. I want to retain who I am. I have 2 daughters. I have a wife, a mother. I have my wealth too. I've been working. I'm 50 years old. I've been working 30 years. There's things you want to keep, and if you can't maintain that, you have to ask yourself, is it really worth to go down that rabbit hole? So the idea is, I want to remain not necessarily a mammal, but still have mammalian instincts, love of fellow people, community. I also, the love of exploration, the love of curiosity. So I think things like that will have to retain with us, even if they're simulated. You can be in a virtual environment and simulate love, simulate care for your daughters, things like that. But I would be very skeptical to become just like some omniscient God. I'm not sure that that's the road I want to be on, because I'm not sure I'd even care about anything anymore, except maybe my power or whatever. So I think most transhumanists want to remain who they are, at least partially, so that when we go down this rabbit hole, we can always remember and reflect upon where we started and the journey we're on. That's very important to all of us.
Zoltan, last question here. What are you most curious about? And I kind of think I know what that is, but what keeps you up at night?
Well, sure. I think just on a personal level, let me tell you. So my history is that, one of the things while I was working for National Geographic, I had a small sailboat. I left from Santa Barbara, California, and sailed, 2/3 around the world, enjoying myself and also doing stories for National Geographic. The side of exploration is very important to me. This idea that I get to go new places and see new things and meet all sorts of crazy ideas. I think that's one of the things that attracts me to transhumanism. And I would say, if you wanted to pin down what are transhumanists, they're curiosity addicts. That's really what they are. They are constantly curious. They want to see what's the next frontier. And for me, I want a little spaceship someday and go into space or wherever it is. That's for me, this universe that we can explore, whether it's virtual too. It could be just as much the universe of our minds as we discover things, create things in our brains. But I do also would love to get off planet. So when you ask me, what do I want to do most? I would love to become an entity, probably a cyborg that's able to withstand a lot of the pressures of outer space travel, cold, lack of sun, things like that, and be able to live thousands of years on sort of a Star Trek voyage. And if I could do that, that would be something wonderful for me. That's really the thing I love most, is to try to get to sort of a Star Trek era. If I could do that, that would be the great goal that I have achieved, and could live thousands of years doing that.
Zoltan, thank you for being on the show. And I'm just going to say this. I really look forward to talking to you again in 100 years.
That would be great. I'd love to talk to you in 100 years. And hopefully we're both still here, happy, healthy, and living the transhuman dream.
Ignition Sequence is produced by Accelerator Media, a nonprofit organization dedicated to inspiring a lifelong pursuit of knowledge. The podcast is made possible in part by viewers and listeners like you. If you'd like to support our work and help us continue bringing Ignition Sequence and other programs to a global audience, please visit acceleratormedia.org and click the donation button. Your contribution helps fuel our mission to ignite curiosity and empower future world changers. Listen, learn, repeat.